Hopefully I'll feel free, even if I'm not. Whatever. I'll learn, right? I'll learn all about it. Anyways, so I love a good blockbuster movie, and I can't really afford to go to AMC Maple Ridge 8, which is my favorite movie theater. If you haven't gone to that place yet, they have these cushioned seats, and it feels like your living room, and it's great. I love that place. But if I want to go there, it costs, me and Jessica, for example, $20 for a movie itself, and then $80 million for popping popcorn. And that's the story of our lives in America. We have to pay arm and a leg for the extra stuff at the movie theater. So what I usually do is I will go to Redbox. And by the way, Redbox, half of them are all blue now, so I don't get why they still call it Redbox. I don't know if you noticed that. Needless to say, this summer, at one point, about midway through the summer, I rented a good blockbuster movie. It was something I saw a couple years ago. It was one of the Batman movies that had come out in the last 5 years. I love a good superhero movie. Don't get me wrong. I love it. And I rented the third Batman movie. I think it came out about 3 years ago. I saw it originally in the movie theater, but every once in a while I'll go to Redbox, I'll rent a movie I really love, and I'll watch it, and on a Friday night, it's great stuff. And I love it. Now, a good superhero movie is something that I love to watch because simply I'm kind of a nerd that way. I never read comic books, but I love a good superhero story. And quite frankly, I want to say that the Bible has the best superhero story. Now, I'm not the type of person that will sit there and say, Jesus is my superhero, and go and tell everyone in the world that simply because I'm 33, not 8. So if I were to say that to someone, people would look at me and be like, get out of comic book land, buddy. I acknowledge how people are when they think like a grown-up as opposed to a kid. But nonetheless, a good superhero story, aside from all the stuff that kids like, is something where a grown-up can relate with. Simply because a hero is the type of person that someone needs for 2 reasons. 1, they save lives. And number 2, they also give hope before your life goes away, before you die. I wanted to talk about both of those today using Psalm 116. Superheroes save lives and they give hope. And what we're going to do is we're going to go our way through Psalm 116 to help us tease out what this verse says about who the God of the Bible is. Let me read verses 1 and 2 first. Verses 1 through 2 says, I love the Lord, for he heard my voice. He heard my cry for mercy. Because he turned his ear to me, I will call on him as long as I live. That was the first 2 verses. Now, what you have there is kind of a picture of a human being responding to God because God gave them something in the first place. There's pictures, there's movies out there with superheroes where people do not trust the hero no matter what they do for them. Okay? But the more a hero or someone, anyone, it doesn't even have to be a hero, it could be anyone, your parents, does something for you, the more you begin to trust that person, the more you begin to love that person for what they give you, for what they do for you, for the need that they fulfill in you. And that is what happens with us and God. God does something for us, and what's the proper response? We follow suit by simply saying, I love the Lord because he did this for me. There are people out there that will talk about God, but God may not have ever done anything about them, and all it is talk. I can personally say that God has literally done stuff for me, and the only way I can interpret it as is God. I can't interpret it any other way than that's got to be God. That's the higher power. He's doing something in my life, and he's done stuff like that for me. And so I love the Lord in response. Now, there are people out there that will say, well, I don't love God yet. There might even be people in churches that say, I don't even love God yet, even if they're honest with themselves. It's more of an issue for trust for some people. Sometimes we have to get to the point where we need to trust God first and say, I will trust you, God, because of what you've done for me, as opposed to, I love you. But the more he does for us, the more we don't just merely trust him, but begin to also love him. And then we can use the same language that's found right here. Now let's go on to the next set of verses, verses 3 through 4. The cords of death entangled me. The anguish of the grave came upon me. I was overcome by trouble and sorrow. Then I called on the name of the Lord. O Lord, save me. Now, what's interesting here, I mentioned about heroes. They save people from death and they give hope to people while they're living. Here you have this description of the psalmist facing imminent death. The cords of death entangle me. And I'm going to tell you a little story about how literally the cords of death entangled me. Literally, Nick Benson, when I was 15 years old. I'm going to do that towards the end of the sermon, but I can really relate with this. Death was imminent to this person when he wrote this psalm down, or whenever he wrote this psalm down, however long afterwards, he's describing this event in his life where death is close. But what's interesting is it doesn't just mention death. It mentions distress, it mentions sorrow, and it mentions anguish. Sometimes we are overcome by the thought of the grave before we ever enter into the grave itself. Sometimes we are overcome by distress and sorrow and depression. And there are people out there in Christianity that will say we're not supposed to ever be depressed. I beg to differ because, quite frankly, I'm a human being and I have emotions and I have chemicals in my brain. Guess what? I've been depressed before. I've had sorrow before. I've had happiness before. Why? Because I'm a human being. We all go through it, whether or not we're a Christian, even if we have the hope of the resurrection. Even if God has done stuff for us, we still have to face the trials of life, and we still have emotions that deal with those trials. And some of that includes distress, sorrow, and anguish. When I watched that movie, The Dark Knight Rises, it's called, the Batman movie, let's go back to that, to kind of describe what I'm talking about. Batman, at one point, gets the living crud kicked out of him by this enemy by the name of Bane. Okay, they're in the sewers. Bane beats down on Batman, and then he takes him to this prison across on the other side of the world. And in this prison, the whole purpose of the prison is to make a human being lose all hope in life before they even die, okay? The reason why is because it's like the person is put down under the ground, and it's like a huge well. It's a hole, okay? And you can see the sky, and you can look up and see the sky, but you're in the prison below. And a bunch of the guys in the movie would sit there and try to get out and escape because there's little rocks, little clefts of rock on the ridge of the well. And they would literally climb up the well and try to climb up it, but usually the rocks are too far apart for them to be able to really get a hold onto the next one and eventually climb their way out. So every person that would try it would fail miserably, fall down, and if he had a rope attached to him, of course, he would still live. But then the problem with that is he would still live in the same prison that he tried to escape from. The whole point was to make the person lose hope. It was to break their spirit. At the one point in the movie, when Batman was taken down by Bane, Bane took him into that well, and Batman kind of reawakened from consciousness, and he says, "Why didn't you kill me?" Here's what Bane said to him. "Oh, that would be way too easy. I'm not going to physically kill you. First, I need to break you. I need to break your spirit." He started using language of spirit and soul because Bane understood very well that human beings don't just have physical life and death. They could have the life and death in the heart, okay? Because you can die before you actually physically die. We use that language all the time. Bane understood how it is to be a human being. He understood what it took to really break down Batman and beat him. And before he ever killed him off, he wanted to make sure that he would break him first and let him watch his beloved city, Gotham, in ruins in a TV set in that prison. That's what we human beings go through. And our response is not necessarily like Batman's. Batman's response is, I'm going to pull up my own bootstraps and I'm going to get myself out of this prison. And in that movie, he did. But most of us don't have that kind of strength or willpower. Our response is not always, I'm going to pull up my own bootstraps, but what? I'm going to call on a hero. I'm going to call on a savior. I'm going to call on someone outside myself, outside of my own physical limitations and my own power, and literally put my faith and trust in someone else who can help me out because I need help. That's a thing called salvation. It's also called deliverance. That's the stuff that the superhero movies are made of. Let's go on though. Verses 5 through 6. The Lord is gracious and righteous. Our God is full of compassion. The Lord protects the simple-hearted. Okay. And then it says, when I was in great need, he saved me. Now, what's interesting about this is if I were to ask a therapist, what's in your arsenal that makes you really be able to help people? They would never tell me, oh, well, I'm just really rude and obnoxious to them and I have no grace and compassion. No, a therapist would never say that. Therapists who love people, who want to help people out who are down low because they might be facing the death of a loved one or for some other reason, they're not rude and obnoxious with them. They're graceful and compassionate. And that's what the Lord is. It's a beautiful thing. That's kind of a given, though. That's the way we're supposed to be with other human beings, right? That's the way God is with us. What's interesting, though, is in the verse that I read, it doesn't just mention being gracious and compassionate. It mentions that the Lord is righteous. The word righteous is a word that some surfer guys sometimes use. I saw a movie back in the 1980s by the name of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and these surfer-type guys would always be like, righteous. You know, they would use it. So I've heard the word used in popular culture, but usually we don't use the word righteous. Most people do not use that word. But it's a pretty standard biblical term. What does the word righteous mean? It means when everything, I'm going to make it simple for you. I'm not going to get into some big theological description. It means something along the lines of when everything is made right. Everything is righteous because everything is made right. Everything is as it should be. Everything is the way I want it to be, the way I need it to be, the way things should be in this world. When you have a world that's more righteous, the world is as it should be, and people are not stumbling around, people are not crying, people are not in pain, people are not beheading other people. You know, a righteous world is a world where everything is made right, everything is as it should be. And we need sometimes to find the people that are willing to stand for righteousness, and sometimes we call them heroes. Now, the biblical description of righteousness I want to give, and it's the next couple of verses. This is verses 7 through 9. It's going to be up there, but I'm going to read it from my tablet here. Return to your rest, my soul, for the Lord has been good to you. For you, Lord, have delivered me from death, my ears from tears, my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before the Lord in the land of the living. That is a righteous life, where you don't have tears, because those are tears of pain. And also, you're not stumbling around, because it's not like you're in the dark. And last but not least, you're in the land of the living. That sounds like the righteous life. That's a biblical description, a Psalm 116 description of the life of righteousness. Now, if you go back all the way in the Bible, and to the very beginning, you have a biblical description there of what it's like to live the righteous life. You had these people who were walking around in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve didn't stumble. Before they fell, they didn't stumble, right? They were walking around, they didn't have tears of pain. No, everything was right as it should be. And most of all, they had intimacy with their Creator. It says in verse 9 that I may walk before the Lord in the land of the living. When Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, they were in the land of the living. They were walking before the Lord. They had their connection to their Creator, and everything was as it should be, and it was a beautiful thing. In the New Testament, there's another description of this. It's in the Gospel. It's in one of the John's epistles. Let me read it for you. Jesus says this: eternal abundant life is this, knowing the one true God and knowing his Son, Jesus Christ. You see, the righteous life isn't just when your feet are not stumbling. It's not just when you're not in anguish. It's not just when you have no tears. It's when you're walking before the Lord. It's when you have a connection to your Creator. It's when you know God. That is the righteous life. Let me move on though. Verses 12 through 14. What shall I return to the Lord for all his goodness to me? I will lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. I will fulfill my vows to the Lord in the presence of his people. There's an image there of someone lifting up a cup in thankfulness of what God has done for them. Kind of reminds me of when I go to a wedding and there's someone giving a toast. This is what the groom has done. I'm the best man, and the groom has done this for me. He's a great person. Let's give a toast, and everyone's thankful. Everyone's thankful for where they are. A toast is what's happening here. The person is saying, I want to lift up the cup of the Lord has given me, the cup of salvation, and I'm going to give a toast to what God has done for me. What has he done? He's played the part of the hero. He has delivered me from death. He has given me hope because of the deliverance from death. And we Christians know where in the cupboard to find the cup of salvation. We know where to find it. It's in Jesus Christ. In the person who himself had a cup that he drank from. His cup, though, wasn't a cup of salvation. His cup was a cup of wrath. In the Garden of Gethsemane, which was a garden right outside the city of Jerusalem, right before Jesus died, he sat there and he asked his Father, please, if this is possible, let this cup pass from me. But nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And so what happened? He obeyed his Father, and he drank the cup of the Father's wrath, and it gave us salvation. It brings a whole new meaning to the cup of salvation when we look at what Jesus did for us. And by the way, if you don't think this psalm is talking about Jesus, I want to let you know. First off, this psalm was written before Jesus, okay? But aside from that, every time you go into this psalm, you see the word Lord, it has the letters L-O-R-D in all capitals. Now, I've said this before, and I will say it again in order to help people in this congregation understand that whenever you go into the Old Testament, you see L-O-R-D in all capitals, it refers to the name of the Lord, which is in Hebrew, Yahweh, okay? Jesus took upon the name of the Lord in the New Testament. He said, I am Yahweh in John chapter 8. And so when you see descriptions of the specific name of the Lord in the Old Testament, and then you compare it to Jesus, you see Jesus fulfilling those descriptions. And this is one instance where that actually happens, because you compare Psalm 116 and you line it up with Jesus' life, and it's perfect. Now, here's where the pivot point of the sermon is. Here's where the pivot point of the psalm is. Verses 15 through 16. This is interesting. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his faithful servants. Truly I am your servant, Lord. I serve you as my mother did. You have freed me from my chains. So all this talk about deliverance, and all of a sudden he's not delivered. He's talking about people still dying. See, the Lord delivers people from death, but then there's this admission later on in this psalm that the saints still die. Life is still a cycle. People who are good and people who are bad still die. So even if God delivers us, he still will not deliver us every time necessarily. For the wages of sin is death. In other words, because we're sinners, we will all die. It's a part of life. It's okay. Because God has power over death itself, not just life. So I've been talking about being saved from death, but later on you have this implication that people are still going to die. And this makes it quite clear that God is not just a hero because he gives us hope in order that we don't die at certain points in our lives, but so that we are not overtaken by a loss of hope when we think about death itself. See, a hero is not just someone who saves lives, but it's someone who is able to help people face death in a way with dignity, face death in a way where they literally have hope even after they might face their own mortality, their own death, or they might be facing the death of a loved one. But the God of the Bible is a God that doesn't just care about saving people's lives. He's a God that cares about helping us to embrace death. Because why? Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of those who love him. his people. We have hope even in death, not just in life. This is a much better superhero than the ones I see in the movies, because he is able to cover the whole ground. It's a beautiful thing. Now, I said that I would talk about how I myself faced death. When I was 15 years old, me and my friend Mike were swimming in his grandmother's pool. And there was this bubble cover, I forgot what it's called, but it's a cover for the pool to keep it warm. And they look like bubbles, but they're a lot harder to pop than your normal bubble wrap. Okay? So we were literally floating in it and jumping on it. We were being idiots. Okay? You know, and at the one point there was too much weight of water on top of that solar cover. And I jumped on it from the diving board, and down I went. It was a 9-foot pool. Yeah, I know, you're shaking your head. Stupid kid. I agree. That was a dumb kid. I was 15. Okay, and so I jumped on it. The weight of the water was too much. The solar cover went down. Let me describe it for you, because I saw this happen to myself as it was happening. The cover's ends literally went like this, like a canopy over me. And I started going down. And I couldn't fight. There's too much weight, too much water, and too much panic. I was in a ball of water surrounded by a solar cover. And I went down to the bottom of the 9-foot pool. And I drowned. I drowned. The cords of death entangled this guy. I faced death before. And when people tell you that if you are facing your own death, there's a million thoughts that go through your mind goes into highway craziness, yes, they're right. It happened to me. My brain went in overdrive mode. I mean, a million things were going through my mind all at once. It was crazy, and I remember looking up at the sky. And I remember seeing the sunlight go through the solar cover, and I remember I couldn't even speak. But I was trying to speak, and I was like, help, you know, I didn't have the strength. And needless to say, I drowned, and I woke up, and I was on the side of the pool. Eventually, I was able to get out of the cover. My friend Mike helped me out of the cover, and I was on the side of the pool. I ended up, you know, because I lost control of my bowels, you know. That happens when you have, everything goes awry. And then I spent the next night in the hospital for 17 hours straight, not knowing whether or not my lungs were going to collapse, because there was algae in that pool, and it was extremely, you know, we were swimming in algae water. There goes, Nick, this is just a worse and worse case you're building for yourself. You're stupid. You were a dumb kid. Yeah, exactly. I learned. I'm not doing that anymore. But needless to say, the doctor said, there's so much water in your lungs right now that we don't know if the lungs are going to collapse, and if they do, there's further complications. So my mom was in the hospital room. My aunts come in, and we're praying all night, you know? We're praying all night. Nick drowned. Needless to say, I'm alive, right? 15, I'm 18 years later, I'm alive. And I'll tell you one thing, that put a stamp on my life forever. That was a tattoo, it was a marker, whatever you want to call it. It's like I have a sign right here, and I can't ignore it. You face death, Nick. I see it before me all the time. Death does something to a human being when they actually face who they are and the fact that they're going to go away someday. But the beauty of it is the God of the Bible, the Lord, Yahweh, the Father of Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ himself, not only is able to save lives, but help us to give hope when we even face our own death. Now, I'm going to die someday, unless the Lord comes before that. But if the Lord doesn't come before that, I'm going to die someday. And you know what? I admit, I'm not scared. I'm scared of spiders. But Jessica keeps having me crunch them in our new apartment that I'll be moving into. So I got to get used to, you know, taking care of the spiders. You know, so I'm scared of them. But I am not, for some strange reason, scared of death. No, it's not a strange reason. It's simply because I faced death before. The cords of death entangled me. But I was given hope. I was given what they call deliverance. I was saved from physical death. But the beauty of it is, for the last 18 years, not only was I saved from physical death, so I have life now and I can do what I'm doing now, I also have hope. I didn't just die and have to face death physically. I now, because of that incident, can face the fact that I can face death physically, but I can face death spiritually. And what I mean by that is, I have not lost hope as a human being. My heart is still a heart that reaches out to my Creator. And the way to get to my Creator is through Jesus, who himself faced death. He himself faced every temptation, but not only that, but he faced death itself, and he conquered it when he rose from the grave. Now, I rose from death itself, but someday I'll rise from the grave after I die, and that's the beauty of it. Now, that's a hero that I love, and the reason why is because he doesn't just help us to have our lives saved, he literally gives us hope after he saves it. And guess what? I can say, along with the psalmist, as it says in the very first verses, I love the Lord. Not just I trust the Lord, I love the Lord. For what did he do for me? He saved me. And he gives me hope. Let's pray. Thank you so much, Father. Personally, for what you did for me 18 years ago. Not an easy situation I had to face. Consequences of being a dumb kid, but yet you still gave me the grace of life. Thank you. And I ask in Jesus' name, Father, that you please help everyone here with an open heart to be able to not just realize that you're the person that can save them from imminent death, but even more so, you can save their heart from a dark heart, and that you can save them from not having hope, that you can take away the tears from their eyes, and that you can help them not to stumble, and then that you can help them to be able to walk in the land of the living. In Jesus' name.